Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Gamecore. Today we're going to do a comparison video between the two different models available for the 8BitDo Ultimate controllers. The pink one here on the right I've already done a full review on, I'll leave it linked in the video description below. This one here is known as the 2.4 GHz model, and it's about $20 cheaper than the other one which I just picked up here recently. And this black one here is what they call the Bluetooth model, and it has a couple other extra additions to it as well. And so in this video we'll mostly focus on this one here. Now the Bluetooth model will cost $70, and it has two different color options, both black and white. In terms of additional features, this one will work with the Nintendo Switch while the other one won't, and it has magnetic Hall sensor joysticks as well. Additionally, this one has motion controls and a little bit larger of a battery. This one's supposed to last about 22 hours altogether. Meanwhile, the 2.4 GHz version comes in at $20 cheaper, so it's $50. And while this one doesn't work with the Nintendo Switch, it works really well with the Steam Deck and other PCs. Additionally, this one comes in three different colors, so you have black and white, but then also the pink model that I have here. Other than that, the only other differences are that this one can switch between X input and D input and has a little bit smaller of a battery with only 15 hours of playtime. In the end, I think these are both great controllers, but one is $20 more expensive than the other, and so that's what we're going to focus on here in this video. Do those additional features warrant the higher price tag? And so, let's go ahead and find out. Okay, to start, maybe the first thing you're going to notice here is that the A, B, and XY pattern is different between these two controllers. The 2.4 GHz one on the right is more focused on PC gaming, which means it has that traditional Xbox pattern, and I'm assuming because the left one works on the Switch, they went with the Switch or Nintendo style controls here. Additionally, as you can see, the 2.4 GHz models will have colored buttons, where the ones on the left will not. Now the Bluetooth controller is using Hall sensor joysticks. That means it's going to have a magnetic connection inside and won't develop stick drift over time. Now I personally haven't experienced joystick drift with an 8BitDo controller, but if that's something that's important to you, this might be an easier choice. In terms of design, we have a nice grippy outer layer to the cap, and then also a slightly convex center. This is exactly like the pattern that is found on the PS4 and PS5 controllers. Now granted, my PS4 controller is super old, so like all of the grippiness is rubbed off at this point, but you can see what I mean when it comes to the design. In terms of the overall feel and the clackiness of the joysticks themselves, it does feel a lot like a PS4 or PS5 controller. And to be honest, I cannot tell the difference in the feel between the Hall sensor joysticks on the Bluetooth controller and the regular joysticks that are on the 2.4 GHz one. To me, they feel and perform exactly the same, and so unless you are really trying to avoid stick drift, for me, it's not that big of a deal. And so in conclusion here, I appreciate the fact that 8BitDo is going with these Hall sensor joysticks in the future, but I don't really see a difference, at least in performance right now. Now I think the 8BitDo D-pad is pretty well known at this point. They use a rubber membrane connection right here and has a very classic retro feel. In fact, among all the other controllers I've ever tried, this one to me feels the most like a Super Nintendo D-pad. And so if you're in the market for a more modern feeling controller, but you also like that retro D-pad feel, this is going to be an excellent fit right here. And everything here feels exactly the same between the two. The amount of travel and pivot and all of that feels really good. Other buttons we have in the center include a home or connection button here at the top, and then we have select and start on the edges, as well as a star or turbo button right here. And then the button below that is to change between the three different controller profiles you can set for this controller. And I'll show you what that looks like in the software here later in the video. Now when it comes to the face buttons, these have a very classic feel to them. They are a rubber membrane connection and have a nice amount of mush and travel to them. And the rubber membranes they're using are nice and springy as well. In fact, it's almost a dead ringer to the buttons you can find on an Xbox controller. If anything, I would say the Xbox Series controller buttons are a little bit more rounded, but other than that, they're almost exactly the same. When it comes to the front-facing controls, I think that everything is well placed and all the buttons are easy to access. Moving over to the shoulders and triggers, the triggers have an analog input right here, and they feel a lot like what they do on the PlayStation 4 controller. I think the overall design and slope, as well as the amount of travel here, are just about perfect. And if you compare it directly to a DualShock 4 controller like this, you can see they are very similar as well. Now me personally, I prefer the analog triggers that are available on the Xbox Series controller. I think these just feel really nice and satisfying. And so if I had a choice, I would pick a setup like this, but I think when it comes to the 8BitDo shoulders and triggers, they are just fine. In terms of the overall shape and design of the controller, I think it's kind of a hybrid between the Nintendo Switch Pro controller and the Xbox Series controller. To start, I think they used a similar D-pad setup as the Switch Pro controller, and also it has kind of a flat texture to it in the center. Meanwhile, it is pretty similar to the Xbox controller in the fact that the face buttons are very similar, but then also the padding on the back here has a very similar grip to it as well. Personally, I'm a big fan of having bumps at the back of my controller like this, and so I do appreciate that they use the same design here. And so in the end, when it comes to overall design, I'm a big fan of the 8BitDo Ultimate controller. I think that each and every button has been well designed, and while I could make some nitpicks between preferring an Xbox or PlayStation layout, I still think in the end this is a very good all-around controller, especially at the $50 to $70 price. Now let's take a look at some other components with the controller and how it compares between the two. To start up top, we have these little divots right here, which I think are probably going to be used for clips for like a cell phone or something like that. But then also up top here, we have a Bluetooth pairing button, as well as a USB-C port for charging and data transfer. If you look at the 2.4 GHz version, you can see that it lacks that Bluetooth pairing button, which makes sense because this doesn't have Bluetooth. And additionally, these both have LED indicators up top here that will turn red when it's charging. On the bottom, the Bluetooth version has these 4 different LED lights, which are to indicate which Nintendo Switch controller you're paired to. And again, because the 2.4 GHz version doesn't connect to a Switch, it doesn't have those LEDs. On the back, both of these controllers have 2 programmable buttons, which we'll test in the software, and then they also have these 3 different charging holes right here. Now, while these both have switches on the back, they do different things. For example, with the 2.4 GHz version, it switches between X and D input. And then on the Bluetooth controller, you can choose between Bluetooth and the 2.4 GHz dongle. And so in the end, there's really not a lot when it comes to design differences between the two other than the different functions that are available in each of the controllers. And I would say the only other main distinction between them is the fact that the 2.4 GHz one comes in this pink color and the other one only comes in black and white. Now moving over to the docks, I really like the look of these. I think that they match really well with the controller and they're nice and small. Here you can see the pin connectors for charging, and then also it has a space for charging via a cable in the back. Now on the bottom, each of them have a slot for a 2.4 GHz wireless dongle. And the way this works is that you can actually just plug this directly into whatever device you want to connect to. But another thing I learned after making my previous video is that this will actually work as a wireless receiver in and of itself. And so what that means is you can leave it plugged into the bottom of the dock here like this. Then what you would do is connect from the included USB cable from the dock right here into the actual device you want to connect to. This means that you'll be able to charge it from the dock, but then also connect it from the dock at the same time. And this is really handy because then you're only using up one USB port on the device you're connecting to. Honestly, I think that's a really innovative design and I'm super thankful for it. I'll show it off more here when we get to actual demonstrations. And just to verify here, yes, the Bluetooth controller has the exact same 2.4 GHz dongle. Anyway, wrapping up the fit and feel of the controller overall, here's what it looks like inside the dock. And for me, I think it's a really good look in the fact that when you put it into the dock itself, it looks like a complete controller. And so overall, I'm a huge fan of this design here, and I love the way that the dock just fits perfectly in with the controller itself. Okay, now let's move over to testing. We're going to start with the Steam Deck. And so what I have right here is the 2.4 GHz version, and I have the USB receiver still inside the dock, and then I'm connecting it via just one single cable here in the back of the Steam Deck dock. And this dock here is the official one from Valve. And so all I have to do here is just pull off the controller from the dock and it'll immediately connect to the Steam Deck. And thankfully after a moment, the Steam Deck will pick up on the signal and then you'll be able to connect and play just like that. And so by far, this is my favorite setup with this controller. In fact, this pink one in particular just stays connected to my Steam Deck dock at all times. Now, when this controller first came out, there were some compatibility issues with certain Steam Deck games. However, in the past couple months since release, Valve has actually released an update to their firmware that makes everything work seamlessly. And so now, no matter what game you try, the 8BitDo controller is going to work perfectly. I was a little bit nervous that 8BitDo wasn't going to make the updates to their firmware, but it was even more surprising to see that Valve did it instead. In fact, on the Amazon listings for both of these controllers, now it specifically says that it works perfectly with the Steam Deck, which I thought was pretty cool. Now when it comes to the Bluetooth version, it's the exact same setup. So I have it here set to the 2.4 GHz mode and I have it connected by one single cable. And just like with the pink controller, this one will connect perfectly. And so if you are specifically looking for a controller to play with the Steam Deck, either of these are going to work fine. However, the ABXY layout may be a little bit weird on this one unless you're specifically going to be emulating Nintendo Switch games like this. And I will say that when playing any PC game on this, it's actually going to register the buttons correctly. So the bottom button will be the A button, despite the fact that it says B on the controller itself. Now, in addition to the Steam Deck, this setup is going to work with any other PC setup as well. And so as you can see here with the AKNES 2, I'm using the AKNES dock like this, and it's working out great. And the same is going to be true if you plug this into a laptop or a desktop PC as well. In the end, when it comes to both the Steam Deck and PC gaming, the difference between the 2.4 GHz version and the Bluetooth version is going to be basically seamless. If anything, the only difference here is going to be the fact that you have Hall sensors on the Bluetooth version as well as a larger battery. Other than that, I would say either of these controllers are going to be perfect for this setup. Now when it comes to Nintendo Switch, it's a different story. After all, the Bluetooth version 1 is specifically made to work with the Nintendo Switch. And so you'll be able to connect it either via Bluetooth or the 2.4 GHz connection like I'm doing right here. And again, it's the exact same setup. I put my one single USB cord plugged into my Nintendo Switch dock and everything's working seamlessly. And so I think this will be a really nice fit if you have your Switch hooked up to like a living room TV. You can have this dock sitting right next to it to be able to plug and play. Now I also mentioned in the beginning of the video that this does have gyroscopic control support. Personally, I never really used this, but I did want to test it just to make sure it works. And here I am with a Bluetooth connection here with Metroid Prime Remastered. And yeah, I had to go into the settings and set it up. But after that, yes, gyroscopic controls are working here with the Nintendo Switch. Now I don't know anything about gyro, and so I can't tell you whether or not this is a good connection or a bad one, because they all feel bad to me. But all the same, if you are interested in this, yes, it does work. In the end, I do think this is one distinguishing factor with the Bluetooth controller. If you do plan on playing it with Nintendo Switch, you definitely are going to want to get this one. Personally, I like the idea of being able to dock it and then grab it out of the dock when I want to play it in handheld mode. And then when I'm ready to put it back and start playing on a bigger screen, I can just go ahead and put it in here, grab my controller, and then I'm off to playing again. So yes, if you are specifically looking to play Nintendo Switch, then I think the Bluetooth one is going to be your only option here. Now personally, I'm not one to take no for an answer, so I did want to see if I could get Nintendo Switch working with the pink controller too. Obviously when plugging it up, it's not going to work at all, but I did have one trick up my sleeve, and that is the new XE2 Wingman converter from Brook. Now this one just came out last week, and it's specifically made to be able to play Xbox-style controllers on the PS4, PS3, and Nintendo Switch. And the nice thing about this one, unlike the 8BitDo adapters, is that it has a USB pass-through. And so my idea here is I'm going to plug in the converter right here directly into the Switch, and then I'm going to take the USB dongle and connect that directly into the converter. And at first I thought I had solved one of the great mysteries of the world. As you can see here, it does actually pair with the controller. However, unfortunately, after that, it does not register any of the inputs. And that includes in both D input and X input. This thing just simply won't work. And it kind of makes sense because this converter is not made for 8BitDo controllers. It's specifically made for like Xbox One or Xbox Series controllers to use on the Switch. But all the same, it was kind of a bummer that it didn't work out in this one specific use case. Now after that, I was feeling a little bit adventurous, and so next I grabbed my Xbox Series S to see if I could get this working with the Bluetooth controller. And of course, when you plug it in directly, it's not going to register. After all, this is not an Xbox certified controller. However, there is another Brook accessory that I wanted to test out, and I'm not being sponsored by them at all. I just happen to have these around and I wanted to test them. And this one's called the XB2, and it's specifically made for Xbox consoles, including the Series S. And so what I did here is I plugged the dongle directly into the Xbox, and then I switched the Bluetooth controller over to Bluetooth and then paired it via that way. And yeah, sure enough, that actually worked. And so I was able to play Xbox using my Bluetooth controller, but I did have to use this adapter first. Now I also tried this using the 2.4 GHz dongle, and that did not work. And so because of that, the pink one won't work either. This will only work with the Bluetooth one. Now granted, this is a $50 adapter, so I'm not really sure it's going to be worth it to you to have this extra bit of functionality, but it is still pretty cool. In fact, it got me thinking about one specific use case that might be nice. If you have an Xbox and a Nintendo Switch hooked up to your TV, you could actually have them both plugged up at the same time. What you could do is have the dock connected to the Switch like we showed earlier in the video, and then when you want to play on the Switch, you would just swap it over to the 2.4 GHz mode. At the same time, you could have the Brook controller hooked into your Xbox, and then anytime you wanted to play Xbox, all you'd have to do is just go on the back of the controller and switch it over to Bluetooth mode. And so I think that is kind of neat in the fact that you could use one single dock to charge the controller from there, but you'd be able to use it seamlessly with both the Nintendo Switch and the Xbox. Now another thing I found a little bit weird about the Bluetooth controller is that the Bluetooth functionality on it is actually quite limited. For example, with several of my Android devices, including my Odin devices and a couple phones as well, they actually would not connect correctly to the 8BitDo Bluetooth controller. I was able to go into the Bluetooth settings and pair them, but when it came to actually using them, it wouldn't register any input. And I think what may be happening here is it may be registering it as like a keyboard or a mouse and not actually as a controller. And in fact, if you look at the instruction manual for the Bluetooth controller, the only time it mentions a Bluetooth connection is when it's talking about using a wireless connection with the Switch. When it comes to PC, it just says use the 2.4 GHz receiver, and then it doesn't say anything about Android at all. But here's the thing that got a little bit weird. I tried it on a bunch of other devices, and for the Razer Edge, this one actually did work perfectly. And so I'm not really sure what kind of mojo is happening with the Razer Edge to allow it to connect and work, but it's kind of weird that it did. And so if anything, I would say that yes, Android Bluetooth will work, but not on everything. In fact, on most of the devices it won't. Okay, before we start wrapping up, I did want to show off a little bit of the software that you have available for this controller. And we're going to use the Windows version here that you can download directly from their website. From there, all you have to do is launch the software and then plug in your controller. And for the Bluetooth controller, you have two different profiles you can adjust, either on the PC or Windows side, as well as on the Nintendo Switch. In the first tab, you can see that there are different mapping options available. You can basically map any button you would like. And you can also see that by default, the A, B, and XY pattern here is more in an Xbox style than it is the Switch style. And this is why when you plug it into a Steam Deck and a PC, by default, all the buttons are going to work properly. Now, also within here, you can program the two back paddles. They are the P1 and P2 buttons here. For me personally, I like to make the right button the A button or jump button in first-person shooter games, and then the left button to be my X or reload button. Either way, you can map whatever you would like with the back paddles. Now on the next tab, we can adjust the analog sticks. We can move up the dead zone and then also move the 100% zone as well. And so if you really want to fine-tune your analog input, you have the full range of motion here. Additionally, you have other options like inverting the axes as well. On the next tab, you can do the exact same adjustment, but for the triggers instead of the sticks. And so if you'd like to add a dead zone, or if you'd like to make it so that you don't need to press the controller all the way down to register 100%, this is where you would do it. On the next tab, we can adjust the sensitivity of the two rumble motors that are within the grips. For me personally, I like to move them pretty low, like down to a 1 or a 2. And then finally, you have the ability to set macros as well. This is kind of advanced, but if you want to do something like that, you do have the option to set it. And then finally, you have one of 3 different profiles that you can set up. And so if you're just going to use one main profile, you could do that. But if you wanted to have different button layouts or different back keys, you could also set that up with different profiles. Now, under the Nintendo Switch section, we have a very similar layout. Number 1, we could remap our buttons however we'd like. And then we have these same kind of functions available with the analog sticks too. Now the triggers are going to be a little bit different because the Nintendo Switch doesn't recognize analog inputs, and so it's just going to be modifying whether or not the digital press starts at one point or the other. And after that, everything's going to be the same, so you can adjust your vibration sensitivity and then also set up macros too. Overall, I'm a fan of the Ultimate software and the ability to make some of these fine-tune adjustments if you'd like. Okay, and so in wrapping up things here, I really want to focus on what specifically is going to work on which controller and why it might be a better fit for you. To start with the Bluetooth controller on the left, you're going to be able to play your Steam Deck or your PC games absolutely no problem here. And the integration with the Nintendo Switch works really well both in Bluetooth and in the 2.4 GHz mode. Now the Bluetooth function will pair with Android, but it seems to only work in specific use cases. And so if you are looking for an Android specific controller, I wouldn't really recommend this one because it's kind of a gamble of whether or not it's going to work with your device. Another benefit of the Bluetooth controller is that it will work with an Xbox, but you will have to buy that separate converter that I showed earlier in the video. Either way, the functionality is there, provided you're willing to spend that extra $50 to get that converter. Now, the 2.4 GHz controller has a much simpler setup. To start, it will work with Steam Deck and PC games seamlessly, just in the same way that it does with the Bluetooth controller. And so specifically, if you're only looking to play PC games or on a Steam Deck, then I still think the 2.4 GHz one might be worth it in saving that $20. Now, I didn't actually demonstrate it in this video, but there is a way to play Android with the 2.4 GHz version, but it's a little bit weird of a setup. Specifically, you would have to plug that 2.4 GHz dongle into the Android device. And that might make sense if you have something like the NVIDIA Shield to be able to just plug it up like that. But if you're trying to connect it to something like a phone, that's going to be a little bit awkward to try to get a USB dongle hooked up to a phone like that. And so I'm putting an asterisk here because yes, it does work with Android, but in only certain use cases that may not apply to you. And so in the end, yes, I do think the Bluetooth controller has a lot more functionality than the 2.4 GHz one. But I think that in many use cases, specifically when I'm talking about playing it with a Steam Deck or a docked mini PC, or even just on your PC laying on a desk, then I think you can safely save your $20 and get the 2.4 GHz one instead. In the end, I ended up finding a use case for each of these controllers here at my house. When it comes to playing PC games, I greatly prefer the 2.4 GHz version. Not only does it have the proper ABNXY layout, but I can leave it hooked up to my Steam Deck dock or plugged into my PC, and it's going to work seamlessly from there. And so when it comes to having a stationary setup like a docked PC, then yeah, I'm going to pick the 2.4 GHz over the other. Now with the Bluetooth version, what I've done is I've set it up with my Nintendo Switch in our living room. And this is also hooked up via the dock and the 2.4 GHz connection. So anytime I want to play Switch in a docked mode, all I have to do is just grab this controller and start playing. I also like that the ABNXY layout makes more sense on the Nintendo Switch. And another thing I like about this controller is that it'll wake up the Nintendo Switch from sleep. And so in the end, yes, these are both controllers, but they do have different use cases. When it comes to playing PC games, I say save your $20 and get the 2.4 GHz version. But if you do plan on playing Nintendo Switch, then maybe you're going to want to spend that extra $20 to get that Nintendo Switch functionality too. Either way, I highly recommend either of these controllers, and I think they are a good match to the price and the features that you're getting. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Which one do you prefer and why? As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.